Hi, in this video I'm going to discuss and demo some examples of technical capabilities between the Preempt Conditional Access Platform and the Microsoft Azure Advanced Threat Protection, or Azure ATP. So let's start with the architecture. The Preempt platform has a simple architecture. This circle here represents the back end. It's a virtual appliance, the Preempt virtual appliance. That's the manager and the console you log into. And then we have sensors, so DC sensor installed on the domain controller. And this sensor is looking at live authentication traffic. Not all the traffic going on DC, just the authentication traffic, which is a small subset. But we're doing it in live and sending information back to the Preempt appliance. That agent can be in either active or passive mode. And the cool thing about active mode is we can actually hold up the authentication request and either block it or maybe force MFA before we let the authentication request go. The key part of that is in live and in real time, we're adding MFA at that network level. Anything authenticates the DC, if we're in active mode, we can hold the authentication, look at the policies, and basically force MFA for certain conditions. Force MFA all the time because it's an old application, or force MFA if something has a certain risk level. So the power is adding MFA at that network level is when we have this sensor in active mode. But it can also be in passive mode where we're just looking at the traffic and there's no ability to block. So that agent has two modes there, but either way, it's always sending its data back to the Preempt virtual appliance, which is installed on-premise. So this is on-premise and all this information stays on-premise here. Now you can install this anywhere, but most people are installing it on-premise. Again, it's a virtual appliance that you install. And then we have a Preempt service account, and that's how we do LDAP queries against Active Directory. So doing a deep dive against Active Directory to look for privileges, how accounts are set up, some of the settings inside of Active Directory, the vulnerabilities, basic AD hygiene. Is there anything inside the accounts based on privileges or how the things are set up that could be a vulnerability? And it's using that to assign risk score, taking all that data is going into the machine heuristics and the learning capability. We're going to assign risk score based on what we get from AD and also what we get by looking at live authentication traffic. Now we can also ingest syslog from lots of different vendors, and we'll show you in the demo, I'll show you what we can do there. But we can ingest it. Things are security related around identity, bringing in router logs, SIM products, any kind of NAC solution. Anything with a syslog we can bring in, we limit down to things that will be helpful and useful. We can also syslog out to anything, so syslog out to a SIM device, things like that. And then we also have connections with single sign-on or platforms, identity as a service platforms like Ping Federation, and Okta. And then we can also connect in with Azure as well. So we can get logs. The reporting API from Azure is going to send down logs to us. We can get that. And we can also get all the logs from Azure and Okta and Ping as well. So we have this connection to bring data in, whether it's via federated connection to an identity as a service platform or whether it's just simple syslog coming in from other products. We're ingesting all that data, and again, we can put syslog out. But the key part here is this agent that's looking at traffic live and in real time. Now, compare that to Azure ATP, is they have agents on the endpoints, but they're sending it out to the cloud. So there's got to be some kind of outbound connection allowed from every DC going to the cloud, or somehow it's got to go through some proxy. But all that data is going straight from the DCs out to the cloud. And then it's going straight out. So first of all, you got to be in the cloud. But also, they're not doing anything live. It's all analysis after the fact, and they can't block. So there's no way they can do conditional access. It's just looking at and analyzing things after the fact and telling you something happened, but there's no way of actually doing anything, no way of responding and forcing MFA or blocking. If you lose any kind of connectivity to Azure or the internet itself, but if somehow the connection to Azure was gone, this all goes away because, again, it's sending out this data from the main controllers out to the Azure cloud. And we've had a lot of customers tell us that there can be some latency, especially in hybrid environments because of this architecture inside of ATP, Azure ATP. There's some latency, especially in a hybrid environment. The other thing we've had customers tell us about is the resources required for Azure ATP is much higher. If you think about what it takes to set up, it's the resources running inside of Azure, and you get charged for all the resources you consume. So before you start looking at this, before you start doing any kind of evaluation of Azure ATP, take a notice of the performances, what kind of CPU you're using, what kind of machines, how much data, basically how much you get in charge for all your resources before you implement Azure ATP and afterwards, and you'll be surprised at how much it goes up. And again, those resources are costing you money. The other thing is by default, Azure ATP supports a maximum of 200 DCs. There's no limit like that in Preempt. If you even go to docs on Microsoft, they tell you there's a limit of 200 sensors. After that, it's something special. You got to contact them. They're probably going to charge you more money. So again, the basic architecture here, the key part here is we're a conditional access platform, and these agents are looking at traffic live, and we have the ability to be in active mode, so we can add that conditional access, that MFA at the network level. That's the big key part here of the architecture difference. So let's jump into the product. So I'm logged into this Preempt platform. I'm logged in via browser. I can log in with my AD credentials, and I can use MFA as well to log into the console. So one of the things, the power of the product here is, I'm not going to cover everything. I just want to go over the highlights and the differences between us and Azure ATP. But insights, we're gathering information. A lot of this is from that service account, the Preempt service account, doing a deep dive in Active Directory. Look at the information we can find out. Accounts with privileged SID. We tell you the actual accounts. Kerberos pre-authentication for TGT not required. Accounts with SPNs. All kinds of information. I'm looking at accounts that are privileged, accounts that are stale, password never expire, weak passwords, all kinds of information we can get. We're deep diving using that with the service account. So that's going to give us a lot more information, a lot more you're going to get than with Azure ATP. And the power of this is all this is going into a backend database, and I can query this, and that's what all these insights are. We're gathering all this data using that LDAP queries, getting that deep dive in Active Directory, combined with the live traffic analysis. We're going to get a lot of that, and we're going to present this information to you. All my privileged users in the environment, all my regular users, endpoints in the environment. So a lot of this data, I'm looking at it, but what I'm really looking at is a real-time filter. So look at all the different ways you can filter. You're not going to have all these options inside of ATP, but you can really slice and dice how you want to look at this data. By privileges, by entity name, by roles. There's all kinds of ways I'm bringing this in. These are all the risk factors here. So I can make a lot of different insights up here, and I can actually make a custom one that does whatever I want. I'm clicking over here, and I can make this any way I want. So these are really powerful insights here, and you're going to have a lot limited more with Azure ATP. And the one thing you want to see here is the scoring here. We're always doing a score of every user and every endpoint. This score is a risk factor. This risk factor is important. I'll get into the policies later, but just in general, we're doing a risk score for every user and every endpoint so you know about it, but then involved later on, we can do policies. Because we're looking at live traffic, we can actually do things on and say, if I see this event, think of it like a firewall traffic going across. There's authentication traffic. We're only looking at authentication traffic. If I see this source going to this destination, but how about if I see this source is a user who has a risk score higher than 7, and then the destination is higher than 7, force MFA or do something like that. So this risk score is very important because it's tied into our policies, but we bind it between 1 and 10. Really simple. Above a 4.5 is medium, above a 6.5 is a high risk score. With Microsoft ATP or Azure ATP, in fact, clients tell us they'll get a score of 75 and have no idea what that means when the Nessus scanner is giving them one score and this is giving them something else, and they're totally unrelated. What does 75 mean when we know it's a high? Is that a high inside of Azure ATP? We keep it nice and bounded, 1 through 10, and we're constantly changing the score. If I look here, Amanda, you can see over time, this is a business card for Amanda Hutchison. I can actually look at her risk over time, and right now she has that score of 8.5, and here's all the components. Nice and easy, tell you the components that give her that score. Privileged SID, inadequate password policy, all these other things that give her this score. But not too long ago, she had a 5.9 because these are the factors she had. So you get a nice little trend here. But at any time, at this point, because her score was only a 5, a policy might have not forced MFA on her. But over here, if she had above a 7, a policy could have said, if your risk is above a 7 and you're trying to get to a certain set of machines, I'm going to force MFA at that network level. That's the power of having these risk scores for everything. Again, we have that for endpoints as well. When you look at endpoints, we have risk scores too. I can look at one of these, and you look at this risk score. Again, what's its risk? Well, has a NTLM v2 compatibility problem, and then signing is disabled. So again, risk scores for users and endpoints is very important. You're not going to get that with Azure ATP. Much less detailed information. Again, as I was talking about here, all kinds of ways I can deep dive into these insights, and you can make your own. Another thing here is the password cracking. You might have seen this up here when I was in privileged. I have passwords, weak passwords, and then for overall users, I have weak passwords. The privilege is the subset. So this is actually weak passwords. So that's a vulnerability. That's a risk score. The hackers aren't always coming in, try to break through your firewall through a web browser, web engine or something like that. They can actually get in as a human user, or get in as a service account, get in as an account. So, and then move around as an account without having to try to break down the firewall or anything like that. So if an account has a password that is weak, and also a password that's already been inside of a breach. So what's the definition of a weak password? Well, it's in a dictionary. It's been in common dictionaries, but it can also be something that was in a breach. So if I look at this person here, he's got a weak password because we actually integrate with Have I Been Pawned. We include a dictionary that comes with the product. It has a lot of breaches from the past, like LinkedIn, and the passwords in there, we're comparing the hash values. But here, we also connect with Have I Been Pawned. So this could have been a 15 character, really complicated password, but it's been in some kind of hack in the last so many years. It's been successfully inside of a hack, so it's already been compromised. So that's a weak password, and that's why he's got a higher score. And again, she can have weak passwords for different people. I can look at Carl here and his particular password as well. That wasn't from Have I Been Pawned, but the Preempt dictionary from a LinkedIn breach. This password is weak. So again, that's going to change the risk score, and that's also because these risk scores are important for doing the conditional policies we can do later. We're also going to look at the password policy strength from group policy. So right now, our GPO from the domain policy is 7 characters, and that's pretty low. It really should be higher. So you have these GPOs that set this policy everywhere, whether a domain policy or what if someone's doing an overwrite. I have example here, Norma Lee. If you look at her password policy strength, it's actually a fine grade password policy. Basically, someone override a certain object for this user, and hers is only down to 6. So we're going to take that in consideration as well and let you know that they have a low password policy. Again, these aren't the things, there's no password cracking at all inside of Azure ATP. Now, just a word, we're not going to tell you what the password is. We just tell you that it matched the hash value, so we know that it's vulnerable. But we don't actually tell you what the password is for compatibility or for compliance reasons. So the next thing I want to discuss here is auto-classifying of privileged accounts. So inside of Azure ATP, we're going to auto-classify some privileged accounts, but only within the Microsoft defined groups. We actually give you a whole bunch more options. So one of them is we're going to do, I got privileged stealthy users. So we're going to classify users as stealthy that, privileged stealthy, there we go. Stealthy users that they're not in a protected AD group, so it's not obvious, but because we deep dive into the object themselves, we can tell that someone maybe gave them a delegated privilege. So over here I have the AD groups, didn't inherit anything from there, but she can hold this administrator privilege because of a SID history. And that's why she's a stealthy admin. She didn't actually get it from inheritance. If I look at someone like Carol, she has it. She's not an AD group over here on the right side that has any kind of privilege, but she can reset the password of administrative accounts that are privileged. So she can reset the password. That is a privilege, but you wouldn't know it from Microsoft's Azure ATP because they're not deep diving like that. They're just doing it from the standard groups. We also give you a way to set up your own. If you want to have customer defined levels of privileges, you can do that as well. So I can set up in my system settings here. I can actually find these business roles, give it a nice name, put in AD groups and users, and then these are privileges, and these were defined privilege roles, either a low, medium, or high impact. So again, that's a customer defined, and you're not going to get that in Azure ATP. So another one here is querying. All the data we're collecting, all the authentication traffic, we're going to keep that. So inside of here, I can query all this data that I have, and we go back 90 days. We're not meant to be a SIM. Anything that becomes an event of interest, if something's going on and we're looking at and we're detecting attacks, we're going to keep all that forever. But anything else, a basic authentication, we're only going to keep for 90 days. So if I look through here, this is my threat hunter. That's our name for a query engine. We have a lot of different options. We've had customers telling us that in Microsoft Azure ATP, your threat hunting capabilities, your searching is real limited. Basic IP address things like that as well. We can do that too. But we can get look at all these options I have for looking at all the authentication traffic in my environment. And again, it's not just my Active Directory. I could also be bringing in data sources from other data sources, right? VPNs, NTLM log, network traffic, Okta, ping. So we can bring in other sources and I can search through all that. I can look at some predefined searches here, or I can just do last 24 hours of, let's say, privilege accounts, or any administrators doing RDP. So I just want to look at these kind of things. What is it? A service. So let's look at RDP, last 24 hours administrators. So these kind of things going on here, and there it is. So when I'm getting this kind of information, you're not going to get this in Azure ATP. There's no ability to integrate or correlate data from other platforms. We talked about that. So one of our data sources could be Okta or Ping. So these single sign-on platforms and identity as a service, because we can set up these connectors and we have APIs and let people connect with us, we have these integration with these identity as a service, and we're gonna get that data source coming in. So part of that data source that we can query on right here, I don't have a Ping, but I have an example here for another system I have. So one of my data sources is Ping, so I can look at all the events that's been coming through Ping. Not only can we do conditional MFA for all the Ping applications protected by Ping, but I also get nice querying against all the things that's been going on in my environment. Single sign-on, where they're going, and some failed authentication. So that integration with identity as a service like Ping and Okta, we're going to get that here with the Preempt platform. You're not going to get that with Azure ATP. Also, besides that, the basic bringing in syslog. I talked about with the architecture. We've had a lot of customers tell us about the Microsoft Azure ATP. There's not a lot they can bring in. It's very limited in scope and the different vendors, a few VPNs, and that's it. Well, we can bring in a lot here. So if I can give you an example, we have syslog connectors. So we have these connectors with MFA. Obviously, Azure ATP doesn't connect with other MFAs. They don't do any kind of real-time response or enforce. But we can connect with MFAs, different identity as a services, but also let me set up a syslog so I can get it from anywhere. I can make a new syslog appliance, hit add, go down here, pick it. Look at my settings. So we can automatically out of the box get syslog from all these vendors here, right? And if we don't have one that you already bring in, it's really simple. All we gotta do is add in a schema, and this custom schema, it's just telling us what field 1 equals and what field 3 equals. It's really easy to bring syslog in from any kind of information we want. You're very limited inside of Azure ATP. And again, we can also syslog out and connect to Splunks and any other kind of SIM products as well. So those are the main things that I wanted to cover. The big thing here is the conditional access. So let me just show you a policy here. So this conditional access is very powerful. I could do things like if I see this particular event. So I'm making up a rule here. You want to think of these rules as like a firewall, and because we're looking at all authentication traffic on a DC live and in real time, I can do things in real time. We give you a bunch of templates out of the box, a bunch of things you can do here, and I can look at it. So here's my rule condition, and if I see this, what am I doing? We can block, which you're not going to get with Azure ATP. We can also do identity verification, force MFA. This is MFA at the network level, because again, anything authenticates to your DC, we can prevent it if we're in active mode. Force MFA, someone hits a button on their phone, and then now they're allowed in. We let go of the authentication request. This rule engines are very powerful. I can look at access types, user types, but think of it as I know the source and I know the destination. So it could be a source AD group going to a destination AD group. The user is in a particular risk score above a 5, or anything I want to do, I can force MFA because of all these conditions. This is very powerful, that conditional access, because a lot of it is preventing that lateral movement. So let me end this by actually showing you, what I'll do is I'll show you a policy here, the actual anomalous authentication. So if I look at this policy, this is one right here where I'm looking at if the user's activity is outside their baseline, I'm going to force MFA. So I'm forcing identity verification with any connector. The user should get a choice of which MFA to do. And again, this policy is written so if something's happening outside the baseline. So I have an example of a user, Larry Gibson. If I look at Larry, if I look at his assets, these are things he normally uses in his baseline. So this is what we've learned is normal behavior for Larry. So if I were to go to terminal server 1, nothing would happen. But if I go to something different, say terminal server 100, then I can force MFA at that network level because I'm doing something different. So let me show you that. I got Larry's desktop here. So if I go to terminal server 100 here, this is something I've never done before. It's outside my baseline. So Preempt's going to see that and say, you know what? I'm going to force MFA at the network level here. Just better safe than sorry. So there's the option here. I'm going to choose my duo. And notice there it is. And notice in the background, the RDP is not finished yet. We are holding up the authentication request. That's the power of holding up authentication request unless someone improves. So I approve the MFA. Now we let go of the authentication request. And now I'm able to log in. So that's the power there. Let me log off. And then one thing you can see is this actually didn't show up. If I go to informational, there's Larry Gibson, auto-resolved, because he did something abnormal, but he resolved it. It really was him, so that's not something we need the SOC team to take a look at. So that's it. That's an example of doing MFA at the network level, and this is pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Thank you very much.